The morning mist clung to the cobblestones of Thornwick village like a shroud of shame, as Ilara stood before the wooden cart that would carry her away from everything she had ever known. Her hands trembled as she clutched the single worn leather bag containing her possessions, a meager collection of things that seemed to mock the grand journey ahead. The villagers had gathered in the square, their faces a mixture of barely concealed amusement and cruel satisfaction, watching as the girl they had tormented for years was finally being sent away under the guise of honor. Ilara was 20 years old, with dark auburn hair that fell in thick waves down her broad back, and eyes the color of forest moss that had long ago learned to look at the ground rather than meet the cutting gazes of others. Her body was large, soft and heavy, a source of endless mockery in a village where hunger was common and abundance was seen as greed made flesh. The other girls whispered that she ate more than her share, that her father had spoiled her, that she was too lazy to work off the weight that clung to her frame. None of it was true, but truth had little power against the momentum of cruelty. The decree had arrived 3 days prior, sealed with the crimson wax of House Blackmore, the ruling family whose castle loomed on the distant cliffs like a crown of stone against the sky. Lord Aldrich Blackmore, a man Ilara had never met, had sent word that he required a maiden from Thornwick to serve in his household, a tradition that supposedly honored the village's ancient pledge of loyalty to the noble house. It was meant to be a privilege, an opportunity for some fortunate girl to elevate her station and bring prestige to her family. Instead, the village elders had seen it as a chance to rid themselves of their most unwanted daughter. Ilara's father, a widowed blacksmith named Thomas, had wept when the elders informed him of their decision. He had argued, pleaded, even offered what little coin he had saved, but the choice had been made in the tavern the night before, amid laughter and ale. They would send Ilara as a joke, a deliberate insult disguised as compliance. Let the great Lord Blackmore receive his maiden and see what Thornwick truly thought of his demands. The cruelty of it had stolen Thomas's voice, leaving him hollow-eyed and silent as he helped his daughter prepare for her departure. Now, as the cart driver, a grizzled man named Garrett, who had the decency to look uncomfortable with his role, gestured for Ilara to climb aboard, she felt the weight of every stare pressing down upon her shoulders. Margaret, the baker's daughter, who had once pushed Ilara into a mud puddle during a festival, stood at the front of the crowd with a smile playing at the corners of her lips. Beside her, young Willem, who had courted every girl in the village except Ilara, whispered something to his companion that made them both snicker. Ilara lifted her chin, a gesture that cost her more strength than climbing onto the cart. She would not give them tears, not now, not after years of swallowing her pain in silence. Her father stepped forward, his weathered hands grasping hers for a moment, and in his eyes she saw an apology that words could never convey. He pressed something into her palm, a small iron pendant he had forged himself, shaped like a bird in flight. It was still warm from his forge, and she closed her fingers around it as if it were her last anchor to love. The cart lurched forward, and Thornwick began to recede behind her, the familiar shapes of thatched roofs and smoking chimneys blurring into memory. Ilara did not look back. She fixed her gaze on the road ahead, on the winding path that climbed through increasingly wild countryside toward the imposing silhouette of Blackmore Castle. The journey would take most of the day, Garrett had told her, and he had packed provisions for them both, though he had not yet spoken more than a handful of words to her. As the morning stretched into afternoon, the landscape changed around them. The cultivated fields and gentle hills of the lowlands gave way to rockier terrain, where ancient forests pressed close to the road and the wind carried the scent of pine and distant rain. Ilara found herself studying everything with an intensity born of necessity. This would be her world now, this wild and unfamiliar place far from the only home she had known. She noticed the way sunlight filtered through the canopy in golden shafts, how moss grew thick on the north side of the stone markers that lined the path, how birds she could not name called to one another in languages she was only beginning to hear. Garrett finally broke the silence when they stopped beside a swift-running stream to water the horses. He handed Ilara a piece of bread and cheese, his expression troubled. "You don't deserve this," he said quietly, glancing back the way they had come as if the villagers might still be watching. "What they did, sending you like this, it's a shameful thing." Ilara took the food, surprised by the kindness in his voice. "And yet here I am," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "Perhaps the castle will be better than Thornwick. It could hardly be worse." Garrett studied her for a long moment, something like respect dawning in his weathered features. "You're stronger than they know," he said. "Lord Blackmore is a hard man, they say, but he's fair, and his son, Sir Edmund, he's known throughout the realm as a man of honor. You might find allies there, girl. Don't give up before you've even arrived." The words planted a small seed of something that might have been hope in Ilara's chest, though she was afraid to let it grow. Hope had betrayed her too many times before. Still, as they continued their journey, she found herself wondering about this Sir Edmund, this knight whose reputation for honor had reached even Thornwick's taverns. What kind of man earned such a title in an age when most nobles cared only for power and gold? The castle walls first became visible as they crested a steep hill in the late afternoon. Blackmore Castle was ancient, its dark stone walls rising from the cliff top like something that had grown from the earth itself rather than been built by human hands. Towers pierced the sky at irregular intervals, their battlements crowned with flags that snapped in the constant wind that swept in from the sea beyond. Below the castle, Ilara could see the roofs of a substantial town, far larger than Thornwick, spreading down the hillside in terraced rows. Smoke rose from countless chimneys, and even from this distance she could hear the faint sounds of life, of bells ringing and voices calling, and the general hum of human activity. Her heart began to pound as they descended toward the town. The road widened, becoming paved with actual stones rather than packed earth, and traffic increased around them. Farmers returning from fields, merchants with laden carts, children playing in the dust, all moving with the purposeful rhythm of lives being lived. None of them paid Ilara any attention, and she found that anonymity oddly comforting after years of being the focus of mockery. The castle gates loomed ahead, massive oak doors reinforced with iron, standing open to admit the steady flow of people conducting business with the household. Guards in the black and silver livery of House Blackmore flanked the entrance, their faces impassive as they watched the crowd. Garrett guided the cart through the gates, and suddenly they were inside the castle walls, in a vast courtyard that bustled with activity. Servants hurried across the cobblestones carrying bundles and baskets. Stable hands led horses toward the smell of hay and manure, and somewhere a blacksmith's hammer rang against an anvil in a rhythm that made Ilara think of her father. The castle keep itself rose before them, a massive structure of grey stone with narrow windows that watched the courtyard like suspicious eyes. Garrett pulled the cart to a stop near a side entrance and climbed down, gesturing for Ilara to follow. A severe-looking woman in a grey dress emerged from the doorway, her silver hair pulled back so tightly it seemed to stretch her skin. She looked at Ilara with the practiced assessment of someone who had managed households for decades. Her gaze, travelling from Ilara's travel-stained dress to her worn boots to her face, which Ilara forced herself to keep composed and neutral. "You are the girl from Thornwick," the woman stated, rather than asked, her voice clipped and efficient. "I am Mistress Beatrice, the head of household. You will come with me. Your driver may collect his payment from the steward before he departs." Garrett touched his cap to Ilara, his eyes conveying encouragement, and then he was gone, disappearing into the controlled chaos of the courtyard. Ilara followed Mistress Beatrice through the side entrance and into the castle proper. into a world of stone corridors and flickering torchlight that smelled of old smoke and beeswax and something else, something like history itself. They climbed a spiral staircase, then walked down a long hallway lined with tapestries depicting battles and hunts, finally arriving at a small chamber that would apparently be Ilara's room. It was simple but clean, with a narrow bed, a wooden chest, a table with a basin and pitcher, and a single window that looked out over the courtyard. After sharing a room with her father above the forge, where every surface was covered with soot and the air always smelled of hot metal, it seemed almost luxurious. Mistress Beatrice stood in the doorway, her expression still unreadable. "You will serve in the household," she said. "Your duties will be assigned each morning. We dine in the servants' hall at dawn, noon, and dusk. You will be expected to maintain yourself and this room in a manner befitting Lord Blackmore's household. Do you understand?" Ilara nodded. "Yes, mistress." "Good. There is water in the pitcher. Clean yourself and change into fresh clothes if you have them. You will join us for the evening meal in 1 hour. Someone will come to show you the way." With that, Mistress Beatrice departed, her footsteps echoing down the corridor with the sharp precision of everything about her. Alone in the small room, Ilara finally allowed herself to sink onto the bed, her legs trembling with exhaustion that was as much emotional as physical. She looked down at her hands, still clutching the iron bird her father had given her, and felt tears finally begin to slip down her cheeks. Not tears of self-pity, but tears of release, of having survived the journey, of being in a place where no one yet knew her as the village joke. She washed her face in the basin, changed into her other dress, which was only marginally less worn than the first, and braided her hair with fingers that remembered her mother's patient teaching from years ago. When the knock came at her door, she was ready, or as ready as anyone could be to face an unknown future. The girl who came to fetch her was perhaps 16, with a friendly round face and quick bright eyes. "I'm Meredith," she said with a smile that seemed genuine. "You're the new girl from Thornwick, yes? Come on then, I'll show you where we eat. Don't worry, the food here is good and there's plenty of it. Lord Blackmore believes that hungry servants make poor workers." The servants' hall was a long, low-ceilinged room in the castle's lower levels, filled with trestle tables and benches and the sound of dozens of conversations blending together. The smell of roasted meat and fresh bread made Ilara's stomach clench with hunger, reminding her that she had eaten little during the journey. Meredith guided her to a space at one of the tables, introducing her quickly to the other servants nearby, names and faces that blurred together in Ilara's tired mind. What she noticed, what she could not help but notice, was that no one stared at her with that particular look she had known all her life. They glanced at her with mild curiosity, as any new person might be regarded, but there was no judgment in their eyes, no subtle drawing away, no whispered comments just loud enough for her to hear. It was so unfamiliar that Ilara felt unmoored, uncertain how to exist in a space where she was not constantly bracing against mockery. The food was indeed plentiful and well prepared, far better than the simple fare she had known in Thornwick. Meredith kept up a steady stream of friendly chatter, explaining the rhythms of castle life, who to avoid when they were in a temper, which guards were kind and which were not, where the best places were to steal a few moments of rest during a long workday. It was the kind of casual kindness that Ilara had rarely experienced, and she found herself responding cautiously, afraid to trust it, but desperately wanting to. As the meal was ending and servants began to drift back to their duties or their rest, a commotion near the entrance to the hall made everyone turn. A man had entered, tall and broad-shouldered, wearing the black and silver tabard of House Blackmore over a simple linen shirt and leather breeches. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, and his face was weathered in the way of someone who had spent years in sun and wind. He moved with the unconscious authority of someone born to command, but there was something approachable in his manner as he stopped to speak with a group of servants near the door. "That's Sir Edmund," Meredith whispered to Ilara, leaning close. "Lord Blackmore's son and heir. He's been away for months, dealing with bandits on the northern border. Everyone's glad he's back. He's a good man, fair and honest, not like some of the nobles who treat us like we're less than human." Ilara watched as Sir Edmund laughed at something one of the servants said, his whole face transforming with genuine warmth. He was not a young man anymore, perhaps 40 years of age, with the scars and bearing of someone who had lived a life of action rather than luxury. There was a solidness about him, a sense that he was exactly what he appeared to be, with no hidden cruelty waiting beneath the surface. As if sensing her gaze, Sir Edmund looked up, and for a brief moment his eyes met Ilara's across the crowded hall. She expected him to look away, to dismiss her as beneath his notice, but instead he held her gaze for a heartbeat longer, his expression curious rather than dismissive, before returning his attention to the people around him. "He sometimes comes down here to eat with us," Meredith continued, her voice warm with approval. "Says he prefers honest company to the politics of the Great Hall. My mother serves as his personal attendant, and she says he's the finest man she's ever known. Lost his wife in childbirth 10 years ago, along with the baby, and he's never remarried. Some say he loved her too much to replace her. Others say he's married to his duty now." The information settled into Ilara's mind, adding depth to the figure across the hall. A man who had known grief, who chose the company of servants over nobles, who was said to value honor above all else. She filed it away, this knowledge that might mean nothing or might mean everything, depending on how her life unfolded in this strange new place. That night, alone in her small room, with the sounds of the castle settling around her, Ilara lay awake and thought about the day she had left behind and the unknown days ahead. She thought about her father, probably sitting alone in their rooms above the forge, and about Thornwick, where people were likely still laughing about the joke they had played. But mostly she thought about the way Sir Edmund had looked at her without mockery or judgment, just simple human acknowledgement. It was such a small thing, but it was more than she had received from most people in years. The days that followed fell into a rhythm. Ilara was assigned to work in the castle laundry, a vast, steaming room in the lower levels where she and a dozen other women washed, dried and mended the endless succession of linens, towels and clothing required by the household. The work was hard, hot and exhausting, but the women who worked alongside her were decent and kind. They taught her the most efficient ways to scrub stains, how to judge when water was the right temperature, where to hang things to dry most quickly. They included her in their conversations and their occasional songs, and slowly, very slowly, Ilara began to feel like she might belong somewhere after all. She saw Sir Edmund occasionally in the corridors or the courtyard, always busy with the business of managing the castle and its lands. He had a way of remembering people's names and asking after their families, of stopping to help an old servant struggling with a heavy load, of listening when people spoke to him as if their words actually mattered. The more Ilara observed him, the more she understood why the servants spoke of him with such respect and affection. 3 weeks after her arrival, everything changed in the space of a single afternoon. Ilara had been sent to deliver clean linens to the Great Hall, a task that required her to pass through parts of the castle she rarely saw. The Great Hall was magnificent, with soaring ceilings supported by carved pillars and walls covered in tapestries and weapons that spoke of centuries of history. She was placing the linens in a storage cupboard when she heard voices approaching, sharp and argumentative. "You cannot continue to refuse every match proposed to you, Edmund. You are 45 years old. You need an heir, and the house needs alliances. Your father will not live forever, and when you inherit, you will need the support of the other noble houses." The voice was female, cultured and cold. I will marry when and if I choose, Aunt Morgana, and not before. I've given my life to this house and to our people. That will have to be enough." Sir Edmund's voice was tired, but firm. "Your personal feelings are irrelevant. You have a duty." The woman who swept into the hall was tall and elegant, dressed in deep green velvet that matched her sharp eyes. This was Lady Morgana, Lord Blackmore's sister, whose reputation for political manoeuvring was well known even in the servants' quarters. Ilara tried to make herself small and invisible in the shadows near the cupboard, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping on such a private conversation. But Lady Morgana's gaze swept the room and landed on her with the precision of a hawk spotting prey. "You there, girl, come here." It was not a request. Ilara stepped forward, her heart pounding, keeping her eyes respectfully lowered. She was acutely aware of her stained work dress, her worn shoes, the way her hair had escaped its braid in the steam of the laundry. "What is your name?" Lady Morgana demanded. "Ilara, my lady, from Thornwick." Something flickered in Lady Morgana's eyes, a glint of recognition followed by contempt so profound it was like a physical blow. "Ah, yes, the Maiden Thornwick sent us." How very generous of them. Her voice dripped with sarcasm, and Ilara understood in that moment that Lady Morgana knew exactly what the village had done, knew it was intended as an insult, and found it amusing. Sir Edmund, who had been watching this exchange with growing confusion, stepped forward. "Aunt, perhaps we should continue this conversation in private." "Why?" Lady Morgana's smile was cruel. "This girl is a perfect example of why you cannot afford to be sentimental about your choices. This is what happens when duty is ignored, when proper standards are not maintained. Thornwick thought to mock us by sending this creature, and we accepted her out of courtesy. But she knows her place, don't you, girl?" The words were designed to wound, to cut deep and draw blood. Ilara had heard worse in Thornwick, had been called far uglier things, but there was something particularly devastating about hearing it here, in this place where she had begun to hope she might be safe from such cruelty. She felt her carefully constructed composure beginning to crack, felt the familiar hot shame rising in her throat. "That is enough." Sir Edmund's voice cut through the moment like a blade, sharp with an anger Ilara had never heard from him before. He moved to stand between Ilara and his aunt, his body language protective in a way that shocked them both. "I will not permit you to speak to any member of this household with such disrespect, regardless of your rank or your relationship to me." Lady Morgana's eyes widened in genuine surprise. "You cannot be serious. Edmund, she is a servant, and a defective one at that. Surely you see that Thornwick was making a mockery of your father's decree." "Woodroom, what I see," Sir Edmund said, his voice deadly quiet now, "is a young woman who has done nothing to deserve your scorn, who has come to this castle and worked diligently in our service, and who is owed the basic dignity that every human being deserves. What I see is my aunt forgetting the values that our house supposedly holds dear." Lady Morgana's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Lord Blackmore himself entered the hall, an elderly man leaning on a walking stick, his beard white as snow, but his eyes still sharp. "What is all this shouting?" he demanded. "I could hear you from my chambers, Morgana." Lady Morgana composed herself quickly, smoothing her expression into something more neutral. "Nothing of consequence, brother. Simply a disagreement about household management." But Lord Blackmore's gaze had already found Ilara, taking in her pale face and trembling hands, then moving to his son's protective stance. He was old, but not foolish, and Ilara could see him piecing together what had occurred. "Edmund, escort this young woman back to her duties. Morgana, you and I will speak privately." Sir Edmund turned to Ilara, his expression gentling. "Come," he said quietly, "I will see you safely to the laundry." Ilara followed him from the great hall in a daze, barely aware of where she was walking. He did not speak until they were far from listening ears, standing in a quiet corridor lit by afternoon sun, streaming through high windows. "I apologize for my aunt's behavior," Sir Edmund said, and the sincerity in his voice made Ilara's eyes sting with unshed tears. Her words were unforgivable, and they do not reflect the values of this household or my own beliefs. "You don't need to apologize to me, my lord," Ilara managed to say. "She only spoke the truth as the world sees it. Then the world is wrong." He said it with such conviction that Ilara finally looked up, meeting his eyes directly for the first time. They were grey, like storm clouds, and filled with an intensity that took her breath away. "I have been watching you these past weeks, Ilara of Thornwick. I have seen how hard you work, how kind you are to the other servants, how you never complain, though the laundry is one of the most difficult positions in the household. I have seen your character, and it is worth far more than physical appearance or social status." "Why?" The word escaped before Ilara could stop it, raw and vulnerable. "Why would you notice me at all? Why would you defend me against your own family?" Sir Edmund was quiet for a long moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Because 10 years ago I learned that life is fragile and precious, that love and honor matter more than politics and appearance, and that I never want to become the kind of person who sees another human being as lesser. My wife, Catherine, she had a sister who was born with a twisted leg. She was treated terribly by their family, called useless and shameful, and she took her own life when she was only 16. Catherine never forgave them, and neither have I. When I see cruelty directed at someone for circumstances beyond their control, I think of that girl who died believing she had no worth, and I refuse to be silent." The story hung between them, heavy with grief and meaning. Ilara felt something shift inside her, some locked door beginning to open. "I'm sorry for your loss," she said quietly. "Both losses." "Bail, as am I sorry for the losses you have endured. Cruelty is a kind of death, Ilara, even when the body survives it." He straightened, seeming to come to some decision. "I would ask something of you, if you are willing. My father grows older, and the household grows more complex. I need people around me whom I can trust, who understand what it means to be treated unjustly, and who therefore will treat others with compassion. Would you consider becoming part of my personal staff? You would no longer work in the laundry, but would assist with various duties related to my work managing the estate." Ilara stared at him, unable to process what she was hearing. "My lord, I am not qualified for such a position. I have no education, no training in such matters." "You can read and write?" he asked. "Yes, my father taught me." "Then you have the foundation. The rest can be learned. What cannot be taught is integrity and kindness, and those you already possess." He smiled, and it transformed his weathered face into something warm and approachable. "Besides, you would be doing me a great service. Most of the people who seek positions close to me do so for their own advancement. I need someone who will tell me the truth rather than what I want to hear." It was the kind of opportunity that Ilara had never imagined, the kind of change that could alter the entire trajectory of her life. Every instinct told her to be cautious, to protect herself against disappointment, but there was something in Sir Edmund's eyes that made her want to trust, to take the risk of believing that kindness could be real and lasting. "I would be honored, my lord," she said, her voice steady, despite the emotions swelling in her chest. "Edmund," he corrected gently. "In private, you may call me Edmund. We will be working closely together, and I prefer honest informality to rigid protocol." Thus began a transformation in Ilara's life that she could not have predicted. Over the following weeks and months, she moved into new quarters closer to Sir Edmund's chambers, began learning the complex business of managing a great estate, and discovered that she had an aptitude for organization and problem-solving that had never been tested in Thornwick. Edmund was patient and encouraging, treating her as a capable person rather than a charity case, and gradually Ilara's confidence grew along with her knowledge. They worked together often, sometimes late into the night, reviewing accounts and correspondence, discussing problems with crops or disputes between tenants. Edmund had a way of thinking through problems systematically while also considering the human element, and Ilara found herself learning not just practical skills, but a whole philosophy of leadership that prioritized justice and compassion alongside efficiency and profit. But it was not just work that bound them together. They talked, really talked, in a way Ilara had never experienced with another person. Edmund spoke of his years as a knight, of battles fought and friends lost, of the weight of responsibility and the loneliness of command. Ilara found herself sharing things she had never told anyone, about the pain of being constantly rejected, about her mother's death when she was young, about her fear that she was fundamentally unworthy of love. "You are not unworthy," Edmund told her one evening as they sat in his study, the fire burning low and the candles flickering. "You have been treated as if you are, which is entirely different. The world's judgment of you is not the truth of who you are, Ilara. I have come to know you, and what I see is a woman of remarkable strength, intelligence, and grace." "Grace," Ilara repeated with a sad smile. "That is not a word anyone has ever used to describe me." Then they were not looking properly. Edmund leaned forward, his expression earnest. "Grace is not about physical movement, though that is how the word is commonly used. Grace is about how one moves through the world, how one carries oneself through difficulty, how one extends compassion to others, even when one has received little. You have more grace than anyone I have ever known, Ilara. Do not let the blindness of others convince you otherwise." Something passed between them in that moment, something that transcended the formal relationship of lord and servant, of mentor and student. Ilara felt it like heat spreading through her chest, like the first warmth of spring after a brutal winter. It was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure, and she could see in Edmund's eyes that he felt it too, this pull between them that defied logic and propriety. In the months that followed, that connection only deepened. Edmund began to rely on Ilara not just for practical assistance, but for counsel and companionship. She had a way of seeing through to the heart of complex problems, of understanding people's motivations and fears, that proved invaluable in navigating the politics of managing a large estate. More than that, she made him laugh, something he had rarely done since his wife's death. She challenged his assumptions, pointed out when he was being too rigid or too lenient, and offered a perspective that came from a life utterly different from his own privileged existence. For Ilara, Edmund became the fixed point around which her world revolved. She admired his integrity, his genuine care for the people under his protection, the way he never used his power carelessly or cruelly. But more than admiration, she felt something she had thought herself incapable of experiencing, something she had believed was reserved for people more beautiful and worthy than herself. She was falling in love with him, slowly and irrevocably, even as she told herself it was impossible, that such feelings could never be returned, that she was a fool for even allowing herself to hope. The turning point came on a winter evening nearly a year after Ilara had first arrived at the castle. Edmund's father, Lord Blackmore, had died peacefully in his sleep, and Edmund had spent the day dealing with the immediate necessities of succession and funeral arrangements. By the time evening came, he was exhausted and grief-stricken, and he had sent for Ilara not for work but simply for company. They sat before the fire in his study, saying little, the silence between them comfortable and companionable. Finally, Edmund spoke, his voice rough with emotion. "I am the Lord now," he said. "I have all the power and responsibility my father carried, and all I can think is how much I will miss asking his advice, hearing his perspective. He was not perfect, but he tried to be good, and that is all any of us can do." "He would be proud of you," Ilara said quietly. "You are everything he hoped you would be, Edmund. You lead with wisdom and compassion. The people love you. Do you?" The question was so soft that Ilara almost thought she had imagined it, but when she looked at Edmund, his eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her heart stutter. "Love me, I mean, not as a lord, but as a man." The world seemed to hold its breath. Ilara knew that this was a moment that would define everything that came after, that her answer would either open a door or close it forever. She could play it safe, deflect, pretend she had not understood, and preserve the friendship they had built. Or she could risk everything on the truth. "Yes," she whispered, "I love you. I have loved you for months, though I tried not to, though I told myself it was foolish and impossible. But I cannot help what my heart does, Edmund. It chose you long ago." Edmund closed his eyes, and for a terrible moment Ilara thought she had made a catastrophic mistake, that she had presumed too much and ruined everything. But then he opened them again, and she saw tears on his weathered cheeks, and something that looked like relief and joy and wonder, all mixed together. "I have loved you since the day I defended you against my aunt," he said. "Perhaps even before that, from the first moment I saw you in the servants' hall and felt something in my heart that I thought had died with Catherine. I told myself it was impossible, that the difference in our stations made it unthinkable, that you deserved better than a grieving widower old enough to be your father. But love is not logical, Ilara. It does not care about society's rules or age differences or any of the things that others might say matter. I love you, and I want to marry you if you will have me." The words should have brought pure joy, but Ilara felt fear rising alongside the hope. "Edmund, your family will never accept it. The other noble houses will see it as a scandal. I will bring you shame and difficulty. Let them see what they wish. I am Lord Blackmore now, and I will marry whom I choose. As for my family, those who matter will come to know and love you as I do. Those who do not can keep their distance." He took her hands in his, and the warmth of his touch sent shivers through her. "I have spent 10 years living a half-life, doing my duty but feeling nothing. You have brought me back to life, Ilara. You have shown me that it is possible to love again, to hope again, to see beauty in the world despite all its cruelty. I do not want to spend another day without you by my side, not as my assistant, but as my wife, my partner, my equal in all things." Ilara could not stop the tears that flowed down her face, tears she had held back for so many years, tears of grief for all she had suffered, and tears of joy for this impossible, miraculous gift. "Yes," she said, "yes, I will marry you." Edmund pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the fire burned down to embers, two people who had been broken by the world finding wholeness in each other. It was not a fairy tale, not a magic spell that erased pain and transformed everything instantly, but it was real and true and strong enough to build a life upon. The wedding took place 6 weeks later, a small ceremony in the castle chapel with only trusted friends and servants in attendance. Lady Morgana had left the castle in outrage when the engagement was announced, but Edmund's younger sister, Lady Anne, had come from her own estate to stand with them, tears of happiness in her eyes as she welcomed Ilara into the family. Meredith and the other servants who had shown Ilara kindness were there, beaming with pride, and Garrett, the cart driver, had even made the journey from Thornwick to witness the marriage, bringing with him a letter from Ilara's father that she treasured above all other gifts. As Edmund placed the ring on Ilara's finger, a simple band of gold that had belonged to his grandmother, she thought of the girl who had climbed into that cart nearly a year ago, certain that she was being sent to her doom, certain that she was unworthy of love or respect or a future worth living. That girl had been wrong, not about the world's cruelty, which was real enough, but about her own worth. She was worthy, had always been worthy, and she had finally found someone who could see it. In the years that followed, Lord Edmund and Lady Ilara Blackmore became known throughout the realm not for scandal, but for their wise and compassionate rule. Ilara established charitable works for those society cast aside, offering refuge and employment to people who had nowhere else to turn. Edmund continued to lead with the honor that had always defined him, but now with a joy and vitality that had been missing since his first wife's death. Together they proved that love could transcend the arbitrary boundaries of class and appearance, that true nobility had nothing to do with blood and everything to do with character. And on quiet evenings, when the work of the day was done and they sat together before the fire, Edmund would sometimes turn to Ilara and say, as he had said on their wedding day, "Thank you for being brave enough to love me." And Ilara would reply, as she always did, "Thank you for being wise enough to see me." It was not the ending that anyone in Thornwick had imagined when they sent the obese maiden to the castle as a joke. But it was the ending that Ilara had earned through her courage, her kindness, and her refusal to accept the world's judgment as the final truth of who she was. She had been sent as a mockery and had become a lady, not through magic or fantasy, but through the simple, powerful truth that every person contains depths that cannot be measured by appearance alone, and that love, real love, is always an act of seeing beneath the surface to the soul that dwells within. The knight had sworn to protect her, and he had kept that promise, not just with his sword, but with his heart, standing beside her against a world that would have dismissed her until the day came when she no longer needed protection because she had claimed her own power, her own worth, her own place in the story. And that, more than any jewel or title, was the true happy ending. Thank you so much for listening to this tale from Medieval Stories. If you enjoyed this journey of love, honor, and transformation, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more epic medieval tales. Leave a comment below telling us what you loved most about Ilara and Edmund's story, or share your thoughts on what true nobility really means. Your support helps us continue bringing these stories to life.